Welcome to the latest episode of Spirit in the Material World. I am your host, Jana Zinzi, also known as Jazz of Wander Women Travels. I am so excited to be here today with just a powerhouse in the world. We've met through the Women's Work program. Shout out to Women's Work, which is an incredible women's business accelerator for women in tourism and travel. And I had the opportunity to host a workshop, a storytelling workshop with our guest today, Marinel de Jesus, who just like blew me away with her candor and her story. And really excited to connect with her today. She is a mountain nomad, a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate, also a human rights defender, has such an incredible background as an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, as a writer, and as a former lawyer. So we're going to get into her trajectory here, but really excited to learn more about her work advocating for porters on the Inca Trail in Peru and her latest documentary called KM82. So Marinel, welcome.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. Excited, really. So let's dive in.
Yes. So as I was like kind of prefacing, I just think you have such a fascinating background and how you got into travel. So I'd love for you to just share what your journey has been from like DC lawyer life to self-proclaimed mountain nomad, and how this has informed like the work and the business that you've created for yourself now.
Yeah, so I definitely I never expected to do an unconventional turn in my life. I was a lawyer for 15 years in DC, and it's human rights focused, civil rights. So I was very into my work. I thought I was going to be a judge one day. That was the trajectory, supposedly. But I actually fell in love with the mountains the same time I became a lawyer in DC. And I just kept hiking, and then it became overnight, and then I ended up leading trips all over the world through meetup.com. Props to Meetup. That was my training ground, believe it or not. Yeah, I just it was a hobby. I just kept on organizing trips, taking people everywhere. And then a friend of mine said, I think you have a second career. And I thought, oh, you talk about being a judge or doing something else, because I was a prosecutor. It's like, yeah, I thought about that. It's like, no, like with your hiking. And I laughed and I said, "Oh, what do I do with hiking? It's just a hobby." And but it seems like people sometimes see something that you don't yet. They see it before you do. And now the joke is on me. It's just like, oh, that person was right. So that was kind of like the idea that was kind of put in my head, like hiking. How do I make that happen? Because I knew I wanted to just be in the mountains. And so I ended up just thinking about like, okay, maybe I can make it a company. Maybe I can take people all over the world and get paid for it as a business. And I was really nervous because I had no management or business background. I'm a prosecutor, so I'm an advocate. That's my expertise. But I just ended up going for it anyway. But there was no like plan. It was like taking one step at a time. And then eventually, just kind of put things together, from A to B to C, and just discovered, different ways to run the company and build on what I already know, which is organizing trips. And then one day I ended up leaving my career in 2017 when my mom died. When she passed away, that was really sort of the gift she left me, was clarity and courage to basically say, and that was when I was almost 40. And I realized, I need to like leave now. It's either you become a judge or you become a mountain nomad. And it's a crazy idea, but that was really what my thinking was, the two options. And I said, I know it's crazy to say I'm a mountain nomad, but that's really what I want to be. And I went for it. And then the rest is history. It became a company, and now I write and also speak about diversity and equity and inclusion. And then I did this film because of the Porter Voice Collective, which is my human rights organization.
Amazing, amazing. I love how you've still been able to merge like that love of, being a human rights advocate and defender really into your travel work and your travel business to create this social impact company. So tell us a bit more about how, you got involved in the film and with the porters. on the Inca Trail. So, just for folks to give them a background of like what the story is about, and what led you to create a documentary about the experiences of the porters on the Inca Trail.
Yeah, so I can talk about the film first. It's called KM82. It's about the Inca Trail porters. Porters are the ones who carry your bags up the mountains. They are working usually in Nepal, Himalayas. Kilimanjaro is very famous for portering, and as well as the Inca Trail, which is the classic 4-day trek that's very famous because of the Machu Picchu on day 4. You enter. So it's 4 days of hiking, but it's required you hire people to carry your bags up the mountains. Those people are called porters, and 99% of the Inca Trail porters are indigenous. And so the film is about giving them the microphone and centering the indigenous voices. Finally, for the first time, over 50 years, the Inca Trail has been in operation, but they have never been able to tell their story in front of a camera. And it's not the kind of story that makes you feel really good about, kind of like the typical romanticized version of tourism. It's really the reality on the ground. And that's really what I was interested in, because they feel like they've been silenced and unheard for so long. And so I've been really interested in that because I think I connect in a lot of ways to silence and the feeling of being shut down as a woman of color. I've experienced that. I'm an immigrant to the US. To me, it resonates so much of how people want to speak and be heard, but they can't. And so I kind of somehow, to me, it's easier for me to defend other people in that regard versus fight for myself. So I'm so used to that. So I said, you know what, that's something I'm comfortable with. Let me get a production team, raise some money, and make this film a reality. And initially, I didn't want to do film because I'm not a filmmaker. I have no background. But one thing I wanted to do first was write the stories, set in a publications, travel magazines, pitch it to the editors. But quickly I realized it's a dead end.
Wow.
No one wants to say yes to a pitch about Porter stories, talking about the industry and critiquing it and telling them that they need workforce equity and they need to be paid well, better, treated well, respect their indigenous rights. No one wanted that narrative on a travel magazine. And so that's when I said, well, the only option is to do a film because I can control that part, right? I'm the editor, I'm the producer. You gotta create it. If you can't, if no one is welcoming you, you create the space and you create it on your own. And really that's how I got it happened. Unfortunately, it's because of the lack of equity and inclusion in the industry that I was pushed to this point of doing it myself. Yeah.
And you did this right before COVID, is that correct?
Yes,
20.
it's just shortly it got done for the most part before COVID came. Thank God. I think if COVID came, I wouldn't have been able to finish the film because it would have been really difficult. But yeah, it was filming on the ground for about 6 months. We were already doing research before we got the money for the funding and the film being officially launched. So I was already doing a lot of interviewing and research, and then whatever we did after we got the money, we just basically used the money to travel and do more interviews and hire the production team. But yeah, it happened before COVID. But even though it was done then, the issue is so relevant still because because of COVID, everything halted and stopped. So there hasn't been any work on equity. Some people try to sort of dismiss the whole idea of the border issues because, oh, that was back before COVID. It's like, no, it's more relevant now because, because of what happened in COVID, the porters even realized how much more difficult their lives have been not being paid well because they don't have any safety net because of the pandemic, right? So it's more relevant. And also the porter laws were enacted late last year. So now this film explains why the porter laws were enacted, give people, the tour operators background story, why the porters are fighting for their equality in the industry.
I love that. That was one of the like exciting, parts, not to have a spoiler alert, but I still think it's, that the fruits of their labor have, there was some legislation around it, right? And I
Yeah.
appreciate mentioning that, like, yes, we have legislation, but how is it enforced? Like, where's will there be accountability? And I feel like that's, kind of a common thing that we think about even here in the States with a lot of legislation. It's like, great, this thing is on the books, but then actually, like, how is it being implemented? And so I have a couple of questions. I want to circle back to that in a minute, but what I'm really curious too is about what that was like being in those communities and, being an outsider, being a foreigner, not being of the indigenous community. How was that navigating in those spaces? And especially too, as well, they're probably not used to seeing like a brown woman from the States documentary like crew. So I'm curious about what that experience was like for you.
Yes, I think it was very much a time for everyone for to have a brown woman doing this, and for myself, for them too, because I think they've grown accustomed. When I talk about people they work with, like the Porter president, for example, he mentioned there was a white man from Canada who helped him before, but or be there for the porters and do some work, but not a brown woman. So he looked at me like, I honestly, I don't think they figured out what to do with me. Even to this day, it's there are moments where I'm like, oh, you're one of us, but then there would be moments when like you're still an outsider. So I think you have to ask them directly what they really think about a brown woman doing this film, because I sometimes feel like I belong, sometimes, oh, no, not yet, I think it's very difficult because I think on one hand I was able to leverage my identity as Filipina and colonize my colonized identity, because Philippines was also colonized by Spain. We have some commonality with colonialism. And
Mm,
so when they talk about their stories, I can relate completely. I understand the indigenous, erasure. I understand when it's an extract, the appropriation and basically erasing and silencing you. I understand being colonized yet again by the modern society. Even your own kind, the Peruvians themselves are doing it, right? The non-indigenous Peruvians. So on that level, I'm able to relate very well. So I'm very cautious about how I behave around them and what I do and my motives. It's very difficult. I think it's a huge responsibility more as a brown woman because of that. Because if you're a white man, I feel like you can get away with a lot of things because you can just argue, I didn't know. But then it's hard when you're a brown woman because you should know. It's like this whole like argument in my head all the time. And I think I'm like the worst when it comes to critique because I'm the one always telling myself, Marinel, you got to do it the right way. You got to do it this way. You should know. You should know because, you're Filipina, you're colonized. That's a huge responsibility. It's a lot of pressure sometimes for myself. Um, but in a way, it's a good thing because I am leveraging something that I am very familiar with that oftentimes has been marginalized and attacked. But then it became my own strength to create this film with a lot of insight and meaning
mm,
behind it, and it's authentic because I'm able to understand them better, more authentic than a white protagonist carrying a bag up the mountains. Like I would never do that, So to me, it's good and bad. It's a very important role to play, and if you do it well, it can really benefit everyone, but I guess it remains to be seen how this film will go. But I hope I just tried my best, in terms of my responsibility as someone who understands the community to that level. And then, but it's never perfect, right? Because by the end of the day, I'm still privileged. I lived in America. I do have the financial privilege as well, being in Peru. And there are things I may never understand, the dynamics of the politics there and the indigenous community, the ins and outs of it. I still don't know fully. I heard about it, but I never live it, right? So but I think there is an advantage for the most part because I'm very careful and I really listen. If anything, what I learned from the whole thing is just to listen to their story and be a listener rather than someone who's telling them how it should be told, right? Or the story. Yeah.
yeah, no, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the vulnerability as well, because it is complicated knowing, as women of color, feeling a kinship in certain communities, right? But also acknowledging that
Yeah.
have we have a level of privilege, whether it's like passport privilege or dollar privilege or, different things. And wanting to do right by people, and also acknowledging like I'm never going to be part of this community to know all the like secrets and to really know what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
you did a really excellent job, and even to your point about not centering yourself, and that's what I think a lot of times ends up like, to your point, where it's like white guys like carrying things like up the mountain, and it's like that voyeurism or centering
Yeah.
ourselves in the story and really being intentional about that. And that's we were just talking a little bit before we got on air about what that's like, the intentionality of how we post about things and how we talk about things, particularly when it's regarding Indigenous communities, Indigenous lands, Indigenous issues, and wanting to show the full breadth of it, and still acknowledging like we are outsiders,
Yeah.
and giving a voice to other people's stories. So I just really appreciate you acknowledging that, sharing that, and the part about listening too, because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
important.
and I do want to add, when I started the project, I did try to see if there is a Quechua speaking person or someone from the Quechua community who can be the producer or the director for this film. I wanted engagement from the indigenous community, but I wasn't successful. And so I understand that I would think that if, I actually would have given up the project to that person for them, as someone who can lead it, if there was that option. But I know that there wasn't, and so I had to answer the question: Do I take? Am I the one to tell the story? So when I asked that question, I did think about the options on the ground, whether there is a Quechua filmmaker, but I
Mhm.
couldn't find anybody who would want to take on the project or know in the community. It's not something you find commonly, from that community, right? And so I said, well, I don't really want to wait. It's an important thing. And at that point I was able to gain some trust from the community, from Alberto, the protagonist or the main person in the film. So I said, if he's okay with it, then I will go ahead with it. But sometimes I still think back and say to myself, if there was someone from the community who did this film, it's probably a better film, in a lot of ways. But because it would have added so much more. But unfortunately, I'm not that person. But I do want to put it out there, like, I guess you can only do your best if you're an outsider, if you're not part of the community, and listening really was the only thing I could do for them, and not to center my voice, to center their voice. So yeah.
I think you did it expertly, and you have a diversity of voices. You have, a young woman who is studying to be a porter. You have the Federation, and so some of the things that I was curious about, like, how long were you there to film this? Also, there's a part at the end where you mention where there's a woman, a Quechua woman, who was talking about her family being threatened. And then you left because of threats for you and the production company. So I'm curious what that was about, if you can share, and what some of that experience was.
Yeah, so the threat on the ground is actually because how controversial the topic is. It's essentially, we have porters talking about their work conditions, right? So it's basically talking about what's happening on the ground with tour companies. And that's why we put in the beginning in the film, this isn't about to attack anybody. This is just to talk about what they really see as a struggle for them in this industry. And it's very important to note, to understand that, because I don't want anyone coming out of the film or after watching it thinking that it's just an attack on a specific company or whatnot. But yeah, but it is real. At first I was already warned in the beginning that I kind of had a feeling this isn't going to be a happy film to make. It's not going to be like I go to in the field and it's going to be all happy and joyful. Like, like, the story is very controversial because, for example, on the ground, porters are very much expected to be, loyal to the companies that they work with. There is that
Mhm.
undisclosed or unspoken thing where, well, if you want the job, you don't talk badly about the company, right? Which is really in general what we would do if we work for anybody. We don't want to talk badly about our employer. So it's whistleblowing in a lot of ways. For the porters who did take that risk, I really applaud them, because it's a risk that they knowingly took, like the way I took the same risk, because I, for one, was also attacked on the ground because no one wanted me to be filming. They don't want this to come out, and I'm starting this process with the porters. And so the woman, was a Burgess wife. They definitely have, that's really valid point. We saw bribery. happened, that's been reported. We hear about people making promises to the porters, we're gonna do this with your community, so in exchange for loyalty, so that you don't talk about the company. I've had been, some companies have been nice to me, so they can win my, my loyalty as well. So that happens. It's Peru. I hate to say it, but there is truth to some governments being corrupt in some ways, and corruption does exist. And so there's a lot of just these things that happen behind the scene. And so porters face that, Alberta faced that, I faced that. So we tried our best to just basically get the truth out as much as we can, and make the best of it. I'm sure there were a lot more porters really that wanted to be in camera, but they said no, and we understand. So whoever went on camera, they were pretty much courageous to do so, and they weren't. I never really had to ask them or pressure them. It's whoever was willing to speak their truth.
Amazing. And how were you able to build trust coming into this community?
Yeah, so I guess you did ask me how long I was there. The filming went on for the official filming with the video, and my production team was about 6 to 7 months. But the research was happening before that, so I was researching maybe like 10 months, 10 months in total, with the filming as well. But I lived in Peru for over 4 years, and that to me informed me very much how to create this film, because my neighbors were from the Quechua community, so I get to really see the culture firsthand, not in a romanticized version, but as someone I know, because they're my neighbors and I live in their community. And so it was very raw and real. So that really helped me kind of understand what they value and their aspirations, and what they want to see, and how they want to be shown, and how they want to speak. And so that was like part of the experience, to live there for 4 years, just to, one of the biggest, like, best advice really when I was doing the film is, because I'm very logical as a lawyer. Obviously, I like to ask questions, so I get data right. That's very much my comfort zone. And
Mhm.
when I was trying to gain trust, I did ask someone from the community, from the Quechua community, who became a friend of mine in Peru. I asked him, I don't know, like, what is the best way to approach this? I'm not sure if I really gained their trust at this point. Is there something else I can do? Because I asked them a lot of questions. I've had conversations. I had meals with them. We went on filming and things like that. And then he said, Marinel, stop. The only thing you need to do is one thing. You need to calm down and slow down, and stop like coming up with all these questions. I just want you, what you want me to do is just to feel. To
Mm.
feel. I was like, to feel, what does that mean? And I'm like this logical lawyer, like, feel, like, I don't do that in courtroom. I use words, and I talk, and I write, and I'm very logical and unemotional, when I state facts. So to me, it threw me off a little bit. I was like, oh, I don't even know what that means. And I was like, okay, the conversation just kind of like went silent. And
Mhm.
then I went home and I sat on it, and I was like, what does that mean to feel, And I think it took a while to figure it out. It's really just to be there, be present with the Quechua community, to go with the flow, and not just be like, okay, I have these things I need to ask. This is like our agenda. It's to not have any agenda, and just to just sit there and just be with them. And
Mm.
then things just evolve. They would start conversing about things without even me asking, and it's just coming from their heart, and they speak from their heart, and that's when I knew it was real. Like, it's more real when it comes from them, right? Versus
Yeah.
me prompting the questions like I always do. And when that happened, it opened a lot for me. It also was very nice, because I finally understood how they were feeling, because I
Mm.
was trying to connect more emotionally than mentally. And that when I got that data emotionally, that emotional part to it, I started to figure out how to tell the story. That also informed me that it isn't just throwing out words in the film and throwing data information. It's also, I want also people to feel it. How does it feel to be a Quechua porter? How
Mhm.
does it feel to be in their shoes? And I think without that emotion and the feeling and the heart, I don't know. I think the film would have just been flat. I hope somehow it came across as really genuine, like they are talking about their lives, not just the work, but who they are as indigenous community and what it means to be working on the Inca Trail and the Machu Picchu, and their ancestors are Incas. So
Yes.
there's so much feeling into it that I missed in the beginning. So that's where I should have started. So yeah, so there's just so many things with this film that I learned as a person, not just as a storyteller, you know.
What a beautiful journey. And I feel like that's such a word for for life, and I think particularly as being folks from the States or in the States, living
Yeah,
in the States, it's just like go, 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 logical.
yeah,
Like you said, it's that agenda, check things off this list, and what does it mean to feel, and it's like, that's like a superpower is to like be in tune with what that emotion is and connect with people from the heart, not just,
yeah,
intellectually. So I
yeah,
feel like I'm taking that with me, one as a storyteller, but
yeah,
just, you know, um, there's a different presence to when we're
yeah,
just like sitting and feeling and absorbing, and getting out of our heads,
yeah,
uh, for this. And so, yeah, I feel like it really comes across in the film. You can see the difference between like, like the intellectual kind of voice that's giving some of that background, and then the storytelling of Alberto and the Federation and the Quechua community. So I just think it's fantastic. And one of the things I also wanted to ask about is, what does this mean for travelers? So like this is happening, this is a story of the porters who are in, the Inca Trail, Machu Picchu. But to your point, a lot of I've heard mostly about porters with, the Himalayas or Nepal, Mount Everest. That tends to get a lot of attention. But then you mentioned Kilimanjaro. So I'm assuming that this is some sort of kind of, there's a global aspect to this. And then as travelers, how do we make better decisions? What can we do as, if we want to go hike Kilimanjaro or do different types of activities? How do we know? Especially because, to the point in the film, a lot of the companies and agencies are going to say, oh, we treat the porters well, they're paid well, they fed well, etc. But that's not really the case.
yeah. I think it's great to come up with this question because in its essence, the film is about public awareness and education. And of course, you're hopefully people felt something when they watched the film, but it's also about doing something. So this is the part when we probably have to be more intellectual and more intentional with what we're gonna do from here on. I think the lesson I got out of this film as a traveler is that there's a lot of things that we don't know about as a traveler. It's easy to hide things in general within the industry. There are it's an industry, right? It will never be perfect. As much as we romanticize travel, it's never going to be perfect. Is Everest Base Camp Trek amazing and romantic and gorgeous and beautiful and spectacular? Yes, but the sad part is there's also a darkness to it. And if we want to be really honest as travelers and equitable and equity minded, we need to also pay attention to the other side of the story, which would be the dark side, the inequities that the porters face. And yes, it's global because it's not just the Inca Trail porters. Whatever they reported in this film also resonate very well with the Nepal porters as well as the Kilimanjaro porters. So in a way, you're getting three in one, even though it's just Inca Trail. I do want people to understand that whatever Alberta talked about, it's also true when we did research in Kilimanjaro and Nepal. And the reason why I do research is because we have the Porter Boys Collective organization where it focuses on all three industries. So the plan was to create sort of a case study through Inca Trail because the porters in the Inca Trail were willing to speak. And that's why actually there was a scene where actually Alberto actually was trying to talk to the porters worldwide saying, this is film is important, it's going to help us. We need to rally together and have our voices collectively, but we don't have that in the film. But that is really what the idea is to basically have Alberto speak on behalf of the Inca Trail porters, but also shed light on the porters in Peru, Nepal, and Kilimanjaro. And having said that, what people can do is really ask questions when they buy a tour with Inca Trail or Kilimanjaro, Nepal, you have to ask those questions. Now that you have the film, you're informed of the situation, right? So you can always reference KM82 and say, I watched this KM82 because before, I think one thing I sense with the industry is that in tour operators, if you they think they easily gaslight you. They easily can say, deny, and say that's not true. That's not what you're imagining it. Now that you have KM82, you have the facts that porters have spoken up. So you can reference the porters and say, I watched this film. The porters of Inca Trail talked about this. The leader of the porters talked about this. What are you doing about the conditions? So now you don't have to feel gaslighted or dismissed because you have actual proof from the porter voices of what's happening. So using that as your tool, you can now ask questions and get real answers. You can demand real answers and corroborate those. Ask them if they can support it with document. If there's a contract, ask them how much they're getting paid and see if it's on the contract, because the new law actually says there should be a contract. And if they say there's insurance, you can ask them, show me a copy of the insurance form. So really, it's this idea of allyship, of creating allies among tourists, where now you can advocate for the porters by just asking questions. Because when you ask questions, the tour operators are going to listen. They have to, right? Because you have the money and you're going to potentially buy the product. So they have to answer to you. So that's how we hope to create the call to action with the tourists, is to use that idea of your tourism dollars to ask the questions, to highlight the porter issues by asking those questions. And then having, once you keep doing that, I think the operators will start getting the hint that this is important and they have to do something about it.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you for that. And then how has that informed your business as well? Because you host treks. So I'm like,
yeah,
we can just tell people to go through your business if they want to go.
Actually, that's a shortcut if you don't want to do the work. In all honesty, because of the film, I stopped running tours in Inca Trail because I actually believe in the change to happen. I'm waiting for the industry to make changes before I start running trips again or find a good partner, right? But I haven't found it yet. So I actually stopped Inca Trail treks on my company for that reason, because I do want to support the porters, and I believe that there should be an industry-wide change. Having said that, I do have operations in Nepal and Kilimanjaro that I'm running, but it's all very focused on workforce equity. It's very transparent how much we pay the porters, but you can definitely ask other operators. So that's how I was informed in terms of the film. I changed things within the operations. Like, I make sure I pay them exactly what they are looking for, make sure that they're covered with insurance, and the people that I partner with do really care about the porters and treat them, like not like, servants, because that's still happening in the industry, but equals as part of the team, like team members. So it definitely changed the way I run my business, to the point that I canceled Inca Trail. So maybe that's like the drastic measure. I have to revisit that, because it's not to say that all operators are bad, but it's just a matter of doing the research and finding the right one, right? Because I have to tell you, people are still resistant. Even having female porters, people are resistant to that because it costs money. It costs more money to hire women than men. So just so
Really?
you know. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's even difficult to find a partner who would hire female porters for that reason, because women have to only carry 15 kilos and men are able to carry 20 kilos by law. So yeah.
Wow. That was part of, as someone that packs a lot, and I really try to pack light. I really try. I was just wondering about that, and like, what are people carrying?
Mm,
It seems like tents or
yeah.
water, clothes. What is it that folks need 30 kilos on their back for, on somebody's back?
Well, yeah. So when you go on a supported trek, reporters will carry the tourist gear items. So that would be the tents, the sleeping bags, the mats, the clothes, the snacks, food. Everything that they bring to the track will be carried by the porter. And so usually they would have a porter carry 20 kilos on Inca Trail. So If you want to share the load with another tourist, you can, but the maximum is 20 kilos. And
Mm,
it's easy to, to really, kilos add up quickly. Weight adds up, right? As when you're packing. So yeah, so definitely it's a lot of labor for the porters, because sometimes, even people who have cameras or filmmakers who want to bring, that's really heavy stuff. Sometimes we have clients, there are clients who bring like cameras and things like that. That's a lot of stuff to carry, and that's a lot of weight. Yeah.
totally. Wow, wow, wow. I want to shift a little bit. We're going to wrap up in a little bit, but anybody, I wonder if you have any advice for folks who are, maybe like novice hikers or, getting into trekking. If you have any advice, I've never done trekking. I'm a hiker, I guess. I got into it when I lived in California because everybody hikes and I'm like, I
Yeah.
love it. It's great. Um, but I'm curious if you have any tips on, how to get started or, for women in particular.
Yeah, so I think the best approach is to take baby steps. I started out with just doing day hikes with groups like the meetup.com, which is where I started. And then from there, you can do overnight, but definitely do research. So, research and taking baby steps would be like the best way to approach it as a newbie. I would say that also pay attention to your gut feeling. I relied a lot on my tuition. If I don't feel comfortable going on 5-day track, or going solo, which I now can do, but before I wasn't able to. Try to pay attention to your tuition, because it will tell you a lot in terms of your whether you're ready or not. And just take it slow, and make sure you're very well informed when you go out. I always do research for every trip that I do. I have, the right gear that will work for me. For example, I would have like the maps and the navigation all set, and research the trail and things like that. And if you don't want to do that, obviously for beginners, a supported trek with in Nepal or Peru, Inca Trail, that's like easy way to actually get used to hiking as well, because you have a team to
Mhm.
support you. And if you're not doing supported treks all over the world, in the US, what I did was join Meetup and all these like hiking groups. They're like the best way to basically practice your skills as a hiker and then a trekker one day.
Is there a like one place that you feel like, oh, well, then now I have two questions. As I say my questions, I'm like, I have so many. But like one of them, I'm like, is there one place that you feel like is a good starter point, like for beginner trekkers?
I think just locally where you live, the parks in your area, and then I would say just the national parks, local parks, that are near you, that are, not very high, not too much altitude, just maybe uphill and downhill, but very gentle. But I think you don't really have to go really far. I think with the outdoors, you have to kind of gauge how you feel about being outdoors, because I know some people who never had done outdoors, and they do need to figure out whether they even like being outside. So basically just try to go on local trails, and do 1 hour here the beginning, and then add up, every time, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then see how much you like it, because some people can be just, oh, I can only do like 3 hours outdoors and that's it, right? And then, but there are those like me who want to live in the mountains. So
Yeah,
you have a variety. And being an outdoorsy person doesn't mean you have to be like me. You can be someone who just want to walk in the park with your dog. That's outdoors, because outdoors is for all, and we have this misunderstanding that you have to be this kind of profile of a person to be an outdoorsy person. Anyone who just walks in their community in some picnic area, for example, a small park, that's outdoors, and that counts. So
I couldn't agree more. I'm a city girl, but
yeah,
I love parks. I love sitting in
yeah.
like
Yeah,
I
because
love
that's
being out.
nature. You're
Yeah,
surrounded. That's nature, right? That's what it is. If you're in nature, you are outdoors. So,
exactly, exactly. And
yeah,
it's so healing, I think,
yeah.
for all of us. And my last thing, I'd love to hear more about, you have some upcoming treks that you're doing, some solo treks, or do you have any trips that are coming up?
Yes. So we do have a few actually on the Equity Global Treks website, so people can just go there and check it out. But I always have treks in Peru, an alternative to Inca Trail, for example, that we do, and then Huayhuash Trek is another one in Peru. But we also have Mongolia on the calendar, and then Kilimanjaro is something I offer. But the main thing that I'm personally doing, which is part of a campaign to elevate Nepali guides and porters, is the Great Himalaya Trail in the spring of 2024. Personally, I'm joining the first ever Nepali women team of guides and porters that are going to finish complete the Great Himalaya Trail over 140 days. Yeah, and the amazing thing about it, as a tourist or traveler, you can join us in some of the sections of the 140 days. So there are 4 track sections that we're offering, including Everest Base Camp, Annapurna Circuit, Manaslu, and Langtang Valley Trek. There are 4 treks you can join. And then the trek that you'll be joining will be led by the Nepali women and porters that are going to be completing the GHT. So you're going to be part of the campaign to elevate the women in the industry. Yeah.
That is incredible. I have so much respect for you. I'm like, that's badass. 140 days. Oh my God.
I'm excited. I feel like it's just like being at home. So I mean, mountain nomad, it's like 140 days in the mountains, like the longest I could ever be in the mountains. So yeah.
It's perfect.
But I'm proud of the woman who's going to be doing it. I think the reason why we're doing it is because the Nepali guides and porters, we interviewed them, the women, and they said there is a lot of glass ceiling. As you can imagine, men are getting hired for the job, but not the Nepali guide women. And the reason why they're not getting the job is because there's not enough field training. So if we can create this GHT campaign for them where they get to train actually on the Great Himalaya Trail, then we can bolster their credibility as guides and porters, and hopefully they get hired more. And to make a statement, really, that women can do this, because they're always forgotten, the women in the industry, it's always the men in the forefront. So we need to put it out there and center their role and their voices.
That is incredible. I love this so much. I'm here to support. I don't know if I'll be on the trail, but
Oh, I'll share the campaign. I'll definitely send the link
please
when
do.
it's live, because we are also raising funds for the campaign. So
Fantastic.
the funding will go towards hiring the women to do the GHD trail, and so your money is actually creating an actual job for the Nepali guides and porters.
Amazing. Always such a joy and a pleasure to connect with you, Marinel, and to chat and learn more about what you're doing. So inspiring on so many levels. How can folks stay in touch with you? How can they find, if they want to book a tour with you, find you on the socials? What's the best way?
Yeah, so the website is brangaltrekker.com, and then /equity, I think BGTX Equity Global Treks. You can just look it up on Brangal Trekker, and then the Instagram, it's Brangal Trekker, that's the handle, and also we have a Facebook page which is also Brangal Trekker. So they can follow me, they'll see all the trips there as well. And the Porter Voice Collective is the human rights organization that I have that has to do with the porters in Inca Trail, in Kilimanjaro, and Nepal. And if you want to read about the porter issues and educate yourself, you can go to the portervoicecollective.org website and learn more.
Wonderful. What a joy and a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much, especially you're another continent away. So I'm
Yeah,
grateful.
thank you so much, Jana. I mean, it was really nice chatting, and I really appreciate you creating a platform for the Porter voices and the film and the message, and just sharing my life and my journey.
Anytime. Always happy to chat and would love to have you back after your 140 days.
Oh, sure.
Yes,
I
after
could
you
give you an
rested.
update. That's next year. A year from
Exactly.
now, about, yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome.
It's a
Yeah.
date, and we'll be supporting, through Wander Women, all the work that you're doing, especially this, supporting the Nepali women porters and that
Awesome.
proves so incredible. Well,
Okay,
thank
thank
you
you.
again. This has been Spirit in a Material World. You can find me at Wander Women Travels, WANDER Travels on .com or on IG, and also on good old TikTok. I'm playing around with TikTok and having a lot of fun there. So yes, more to come. Thank you. Be well, be safe, be loving, be kind. Until next time.